The village of St. Mary Mead lay nestled in a quiet hollow of the English countryside, its stone cottages and ivy-draped walls bathed in the soft, golden light of an early spring morning. There was a hum in the air, a restless undercurrent that rippled through the hedgerows and whispered along the cobblestone lanes. It was the sort of day that promised something extraordinary, not the ordinary rhythm of milking cows or baking bread, but a moment that would linger in the village's memory, etched into its quiet history like a shadow cast long after the sun had set. A wedding was to take place, and not just any wedding, but one that had set tongues wagging and eyes peering from behind lace curtains for weeks. Lavinia Kingsley, the poised and enigmatic daughter of the late Dr. Kingsley, was to marry Arthur Barrington, a young man of good standing whose family name carried the weight of old money and older secrets. The church bells had been polished to a gleam, the pews dusted with a fervor reserved for royalty, and the villagers, those who knew the couple and those who merely pretended to, had gathered in a throng of feathered hats and polished shoes, their chatter a symphony of anticipation. But as the sun climbed higher and the appointed hour drew near, something felt off. The church doors stood open, welcoming the breeze that rustled the leaves in the churchyard, yet no carriage rolled into view. No clatter of hooves, no glimpse of white lace fluttering from a window. The vicar, a man of gentle demeanor and practiced patience, stood at the altar, his hands clasped in a gesture of calm that belied the faint crease forming on his brow. Arthur, the groom, waited beside him, his posture as stiff as a soldier's, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. He tugged at his cuffs, a nervous habit that went unnoticed by most, but gleamed like a beacon to one keen observer seated quietly toward the back of the pews. Miss Jane Marple, her gray hair tucked neatly beneath a modest hat, her hands folded primly in her lap, watched the scene unfold with the stillness of a cat stalking prey. She had seen many weddings in her time, joyful ones, tearful ones, even reluctant ones, but this, she sensed, was something altogether different. The air was too thick, the whispers too sharp, and the glances too fleeting. Something was amiss, and Miss Marple, with her unassuming air and razor-sharp mind, intended to find out what it first. The delay was brushed aside with the usual excuses. The flowers must be late, Mrs. Weatherby murmured, her feathered hat tilting precariously as she craned her neck toward the door. Or perhaps the veil needed one last stitch, offered Mrs. Hartnell, her voice bright, but her eyes darting to her neighbor, as if seeking confirmation. The villagers nodded, clinging to these threads of normalcy, though the hum of their chatter grew tighter, more urgent. Arthur's smile remained fixed, a brittle thing that threatened to crack with each passing minute, and the vicar's murmured reassurances grew quieter, less convincing. Outside, the breeze carried the faint rustle of leaves, but still no sound of wheels on gravel, no sign of the bride who should have been there, radiant and blushing, stepping into her new life. A quarter of an hour stretched into half, and the whispers turned bolder, less polite. Nerves, Mrs. Price declared with the certainty of a woman who prided herself on knowing everyone's business. Young girls these days, all this talk of freedom, it gives them ideas. But Miss Marple, her gaze drifting to the edges of the scene, saw more than nerves in the groom's paling cheeks, more than idle gossip in the villagers' eager tones. She saw a puzzle, its pieces scattered just out of reach, waiting for someone to pick them up. That it was then, as the morning light spilled through the stained glass and painted the flagstones in hues of red and gold, that Miss Marple's attention shifted. Beyond the lich gate, where the churchyard met the lane, two figures stood in hushed conversation. Mrs. Barrington, the groom's mother, her posture rigid as iron, and a younger woman, unknown to Miss Marple, her face pale and drawn. Their words were lost to the wind, but their gestures were sharp, urgent, a dance of tension that ended with Mrs. Barrington's gloved hand slicing through the air and the stranger turning away, vanishing down the path toward the inn. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. She said nothing, of course. Miss Marple rarely spoke until she had something worth saying, but behind her gentle smile, her mind turned over the first clue, a key sliding into a lock she hadn't yet known existed. The hour passed, and still Lavinia Kingsley did not arrive. The villagers' chatter grew louder, their theories wilder. Perhaps the dress tore, someone suggested. Or she's had second thoughts. Came another voice, darker, more knowing. Mrs. Weatherby, never one to miss a chance for drama, leaned forward. They say her first engagement ended in tragedy. Maybe she remembered it at the last moment. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication, feeding the village's hunger for scandal. Arthur's hands trembled now, his cufflinks rattling faintly in the silence between whispers, and the vicar's smile strained at the edges. But Miss Marple remained still, listening not just to the words but to the spaces between them, the eagerness, the unease, the faint undercurrent of something less pleasant. In her experience, gossip often held a kernel of truth, twisted though it might be, and she filed it away, a thread to tug at later. It wasn't until later that afternoon, as Miss Marple took her usual walk along the lane toward the Kingsley house, that the first tangible clue emerged. The path was quiet, lined with hawthorn and bramble, the air soft with the promise of rain. She moved slowly, her knees protesting the years, when something caught her eye, half buried beneath a tangle of grass and fallen leaves, a pale cream glove, the sort a bride might wear. She stooped, lifting it with careful fingers, and turned it over. It was torn, not worn or snagged, but ripped along the seam as though yanked violently from a hand. Miss Marple's lips pressed into a thin line. She traced the small embroidered initials inside, LK, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the breeze. Lavinia Kingsley had been a neat child, never one to leave her belongings strewn about, and yet here was her glove, abandoned on the very road her carriage should have traveled. Constable Barnes might dismiss it as nothing, a trifle lost in the wind, but Miss Marple knew better. In the English countryside, nothing was a rarity, and this was something. She tucked the glove into her pocket and walked back toward the village, her steps measured, her mind alight with questions. A bride who didn't arrive. A groom who glanced not at the door, but at his mother. A stranger who fled down the lane. And now a torn glove, a silent witness to a struggle no one had seen. This was no simple case of cold feet, Miss Marple thought, her hands clasped behind her back as she passed the church once more. This was the first ripple of something deeper, something older, a secret that had waited in the shadows of St. Mary Mead, biding its time. The truth, she knew, was like a guest at a village wedding. It always arrived, invited or not, and often with more baggage than anyone expected. And as the sun dipped below the hills, casting long shadows across the quiet village, Miss Marple resolved to meet it head-on, one careful step at a time. The village of St. Mary Mead had slipped into the embrace of night, its quiet lanes swallowed by a darkness that seemed to press against the windows and seep through the cracks of the old stone cottages. Miss Jane Marple moved through this shadowed world with the steady precision of a clockmaker assembling a delicate mechanism. Her gray eyes, sharp and unclouded by the hour, caught every flicker of movement, the twitch of a curtain in Mrs. Price's window, the distant sway of a lantern marking the path to the inn. Whispers had reached her, carried on the wind like fallen leaves. Lavinia Kingsley had not simply vanished, but had fled, a frightened figure escaping an unseen snare. And Miss Marple, with her quiet certainty and unshakable resolve, knew where such a bird might hide. The Black Heron stood apart from the village, its weathered timbers groaning under the weight of time and untold tales. The sign above the door creaked mournfully, its faded letters a ghostly echo of better days. Miss Marple pushed it open, her gloved hand firm, her face a mask of serene indifference. The interior was a cavern of dim light, the fire in the hearth spitting fitfully, casting jagged shadows across the walls. The innkeeper, a burly man with a face reddened by years of drink, looked up from behind the counter, his small eyes narrowing. "Evening, miss," he rasped, his voice like stones grinding together. "Not many venture here after dark." "I find the dark rather revealing," Miss Marple replied, her tone cool and edged with a faint, knowing smile. "I'm looking for a young woman. Fair hair, slight frame. I believe she's taken refuge here." The innkeeper's gaze darted sideways, a flicker of unease betraying his gruff exterior. "Haven't seen anyone like that," he muttered, polishing a glass with unnecessary vigor. But Miss Marple's attention had already shifted, drawn to a figure hunched in the corner, cloaked in a heavy shawl. The firelight caught a pale cheek, the tremble of a hand clutching the fabric. Lavinia Kingsley. Miss Marple crossed the room, her heels tapping a deliberate rhythm on the worn floorboards, each step a quiet assertion of purpose. Lavinia, my dear, she said, her voice low and steady, devoid of surprise or warmth. I suspected I might find you here. Lavinia's head jerked up, her eyes wide and shimmering with a fear that had rooted itself deep within her. For a moment, she seemed poised to flee, but then her shoulders sagged, and she buried her face in her hands. Miss Marple, she whispered, her voice threadbare. I didn't know where else to turn. I couldn't face it. Miss Marple drew a chair and sat, her movements precise, her gaze unwavering. She folded her hands in her lap, a picture of calm authority. Face what, precisely? She asked, her tone as casual as if they were discussing a garden party. The wedding? Or something more final? Lavinia's breath caught, her eyes darting to the door as though it might burst open with unseen menace. They told me, she said, words spilling out in a frantic rush. They said if I married him, if I went through with it, I wouldn't leave that church alive. I didn't know what to do, Miss Marple. I couldn't risk it, not after everything. Miss Marple tilted her head, a faint spark of curiosity glinting in her eyes, though her face remained impassive. They, she prompted, her voice a quiet blade slicing through Lavinia's panic. Who are they? Lavinia's fingers twisted the shawl until the fabric strained. Letters, she said at last, her voice dropping to a whisper. They started months ago. Anonymous at first, just notes, saying they knew about him. The man I loved years ago. My family forbade it and drove him away, but the letters knew everything. Then they grew darker. They demanded money and threatened to expose it all. My secrets, my family's secrets, unless I paid. And when I didn't, they said the wedding would be my grave. Miss Marple's lips pressed into a thin line, though her composure held firm. Blackmail was a familiar thread in the tapestry of village life, one she had unpicked many times before. And this man, she said, her tone measured, the one your family disapproved of, what became of him? Lavinia's eyes darkened, and she looked away, her voice barely audible. He died. Suddenly. They said it was an illness, but I never believed it. Not after what my father muttered, about protecting the family name, ensuring certain mistakes didn't linger. The letters knew that, too, more than I ever told anyone. Miss Marple nodded once, a small, precise gesture, as though slotting a piece into place. I see, she said, her voice carrying a quiet weight. And so you fled. A practical choice, perhaps. But why here, Lavinia? Why this inn, so near the village you abandoned? Lavinia met her gaze, a flicker of defiance cutting through her despair. Because I had to know, she said. I had to know who was doing this, who hated me enough to threaten my life. I thought if I stayed close, I might see something, hear something. But now, I'm not sure I'll ever escape it. Miss Marple leaned back, her eyes never wavering. Escape is a curious notion, she mused, her tone cool and detached. It often demands a price we don't foresee. But we'll come to that in time. For now, I suspect we've only scratched the surface. The inn's door creaked open, admitting a gust of cold air and the heavy tread of boots. Miss Marple turned, her expression unchanged, as Constable Barnes stepped inside, his broad face flushed. Miss Marple, he said, tipping his hat. Thought I'd find you poking about. There's trouble up at the Kingsley place, something you'll want to see. Miss Marple rose, her movements fluid and unhurried. Is that so? She said, her voice edged with faint curiosity. Well, then, Constable, lead on. I do enjoy a complication. The Kingsley estate loomed against the night sky, its once proud walls now crumbling under neglect. Ivy clung to the stone like a shroud, and the windows stared blankly, reflecting only darkness. Miss Marple followed Barnes through the tangled garden, her steps sure, her eyes scanning the ground with quiet intent. He stopped at a disused well, its mouth a black void, and pointed downward. Found her an hour ago, he said gruffly. Gardner thought he'd hit a rock till he saw the hair. Miss Marple peered into the depths, her face a mask of calm. A body lay crumpled below, half buried in mud, a pale hand gleaming faintly. A woman, she observed, her tone flat. Not Lavinia, I presume? Barnes shook his head. No, not her. Don't know who she is. Face is battered, no papers. Dressed fine, though. Thought you might have a notion. Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. How thoughtful of you, Constable, she replied dryly. I'll take a closer look. A dead woman often has more to say than the living. Barnes muttered something, but stepped aside. Miss Marple crouched by the well, her gloved hands resting on the rim as she studied the figure below. The dress was silk, stained and torn, a gold chain glinting at her throat. Her eyes narrowed, her mind already weaving threads. Fetch a lantern, she said briskly. And a rope. I want her brought up. There's more here than meets the eye. Barnes trudged off, grumbling, always making it harder than it needs to be. Miss Marple straightened, her gaze lingering on the well as the wind sighed through the trees. A dead woman, a fleeing bride, a family steeped in shadows. This was no simple tale of cold feet. When the body was hauled up, the night had thickened, the air heavy with damp and decay. The woman lay on the grass, her face bruised, her eyes staring blankly. Miss Marple knelt beside her, her movements precise, her expression cold. She brushed hair from the brow, revealing a crescent scar. Marianne Fairbanks, she murmured, her voice a quiet blade. Barnes blinked, lantern swaying. You know her? I know of her. Miss Marple corrected, her tone icy. Daughter of Emma Fairbanks, a maid here 20 years ago. Emma died mysteriously, and Marianne, it seems, has returned to stir old embers. Barnes scratched his head. Return for what? And how'd she end up dead? That, Constable, is the question, Miss Marple said, rising. Likely tied to Lavinia's first fiancé, a man who died too conveniently. Marianne knew this family's secrets, and someone silenced her. She turned to the estate, its windows glinting like watchful eyes. Bring her inside, she instructed. I'll speak with the family. They'll have answers, whether they wish to give them or not. The grand hall of the Kingsley estate echoed with faded glory, its cracked plaster and stern portraits a testament to lost pride. Mrs. Barrington stood by the fireplace, her posture rigid, her smile a brittle veneer. Miss Marple, she said, her voice taut. What brings you here at this hour? Not a visit, Mrs. Barrington, Miss Marple replied, her tone smooth and cold. A necessity. A woman is dead, one who knew your family's secrets. Shall we begin? Mrs. Barrington's smile faltered, her hands tightening. Caroline, the groom's sister, sat nearby, her knuckles white, her eyes darting. An elderly aunt perched by the window, her floral dress a jarring note in the gloom, her gaze distant yet sharp. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice cutting through the silence. Marianne Fairbanks, does the name stir any memories? Mrs. Barrington's face hardened. A maid's daughter, long gone. Why should it matter? Because she's dead in your garden, Miss Marple said, her tone unrelenting. And I suspect she came to reclaim something, or expose it. Caroline shifted, her voice sharp. This is nonsense. What could she want? Miss Marple's eyes flicked to her, cold and piercing. Perhaps the truth about a man Lavinia loved, a man who died under your family's watch. Or perhaps a child, hidden away, born of shame. The aunts had snapped up, her eyes glinting. Careful, Miss Marple, she said, her voice low. Some truths are best left buried. Miss Marple smiled faintly. In my experience, they never stay buried. The investigation deepened as Miss Marple pieced together fragments. Lavinia's tale of blackmail rang true. Letters found in her room confirmed it, their venomous words hinting at a past affair and a death too neatly explained. Marianne's body bore marks of struggle, her scar linking her to Emma, whose accident now seemed deliberate. The vicar, pressed by Miss Marple, revealed a child, Emma's daughter, Marianne, hidden by the family to erase a scandal. Mrs. Barrington's composure cracked as Miss Marple confronted her. You thought Marianne was Lavinia, she said, her voice a quiet accusation. You killed her to protect your son's future. I didn't mean, Mrs. Barrington stammered, then fell silent, her face ashened. Caroline's blackmail unraveled next, her greed and fear exposed. I only wanted control, she admitted, her voice trembling. I didn't know it would end like this. The aunt, clutching an old letter, watched in silence, her eyes revealing a love lost to the family's machinations. The darkest secret emerged. Marianne had sought to claim her birthright, threatening the Barrington legacy. Her death was a desperate act to bury the past, but it only unearthed it. Lavinia returned, marrying Arthur in a subdued ceremony, her eyes haunted. Miss Marple watched, her satisfaction tempered by the knowledge that truth, while freeing, left scars. The family's secrets, laid bare, destroyed as much as they healed, a reminder that in St. Mary Mead, the past was never truly gone. The Kingsley estate stood like a mausoleum against the bruised sky of St. Mary Mead, its once regal silhouette now a decaying monument to pride and shame. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and rotting leaves, a fitting shroud for the secrets that festered within its walls. Miss Jane Marple stepped into the grand hall, her heels clicking on the cracked marble with the precision of a metronome, her gray eyes glinting like steel in the dim light of the flickering chandelier. She had seen many houses like this, beautiful facades hiding rot beneath, but tonight she sensed something more sinister, a darkness so profound it seemed to pulse in the shadows. Mrs. Barrington stood by the fireplace, her rigid posture of fragile armor against the storm Miss Marple brought with her. Caroline, the groom's sister, sat in a high-backed chair, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles gleamed white, her eyes darting like a cornered animal's. The elderly aunt lingered near the window, her floral dress a garish splash of color in the gloom, her gaze fixed on something beyond the glass, something only she could see. The room crackled with tension, a silent battlefield where every glance was a weapon and every breath a calculated move. Miss Marple set her bag down with deliberate care, her movements unhurried, her face a mask of serene indifference. "Good evening," she said, her voice smooth and cold as ice over a frozen lake. "I trust you've all had time to compose yourselves since Marianne Fairbanks was pulled from your well. A curious place for a guest, wouldn't you say?" Mrs. Barrington's thin smile twitched, a crack in her veneer. "Miss Marple," she replied, her tone brittle, "this is hardly the time for your quaint observations. A tragedy has occurred, and we're all quite shaken." "Shaken, perhaps," Miss Marple said, stepping closer, her eyes locking onto Mrs. Barrington's. "But surprised? I think not. Marianne was no stranger to this house, nor to its secrets, and I suspect one of you knows exactly why she's dead." Caroline's head snapped up, her voice sharp and defensive. "That's absurd. She was a nobody, a maid's brat. What could she possibly mean to us?" Miss Marple turned her gaze to Caroline, her expression unchanging, though a faint flicker of disdain crossed her features. "A nobody, you say? Yet she wore a bride's gown, Lavinia's gown, no less, when she was dragged from that well. Curious, isn't it, how a nobody came to play such a starring role in your family's little drama?" The aunt shifted, her voice low and edged with warning. "You're treading on dangerous ground, Miss Marple. Some things are better left alone." "Dangerous ground is where the truth often lies," Miss Marple replied, her tone cutting through the air like a blade. "And I intend to walk it. Shall we start with why Marianne Fairbanks pretended to be Lavinia Kingsley, or why someone here thought killing her would bury a past that refuses to stay dead?" The room fell silent, the weight of her words pressing down like a physical force. Mrs. Barrington's hands trembled slightly, though she quickly clasped them together, her face paling. Caroline's eyes widened, a flicker of panic breaking through her defiance. The aunt merely watched, her lips curling into a faint, enigmatic smile, as though she alone understood the game being played. Miss Marple began her unraveling with the precision of a surgeon, each question a scalpel slicing deeper into the family's facade. "Let's consider Marianne," she said, pacing slowly before the fireplace, her voice steady and unrelenting. "A maid's daughter, born to Emma Fairbanks, who served this house 20 years ago. Emma died, officially an accident, though the vicar recalls whispers of something more sinister. A fall down the cellar stairs, wasn't it? Curious how such falls happen to those who know too much." Mrs. Barrington's voice rose, sharp and strained. "That was years ago. What does it have to do with now?" "Everything," Miss Marple said, turning to face her, her eyes glinting with quiet menace. "Because Marianne wasn't just Emma's daughter. She was tied to this family by blood, a child born of a scandal, so while you've all spent decades burying it. Tell me, Mrs. Barrington, did you know who Marianne really was when you struck her down?" The accusation hung in the air, a thunderclap in the silence. Mrs. Barrington staggered back, her hand flying to her chest. Struck her down? I did no such thing. You've no proof. No proof. Miss Marple's lips curved faintly, a smile devoid of warmth. The gardener found a brooch near the well, yours, I believe, with the Barrington crest. It was clutched in Mary Ann's hand, torn from your dress in a struggle. And then there's the gown, Lavinia's wedding dress, which Mary Ann wore. You thought she was Lavinia, didn't you? In your panic, you saw the bride who threatened your family's honor and acted to silence her. Mrs. Barrington's face crumpled, her composure shattering. I thought she'd ruin us. Lavinia was going to marry Arthur, and then this impostor appeared, wearing her dress, taunting us. I couldn't let it happen, not after everything we've done to protect our name. Caroline leapt to her feet, her voice shrill. Mother, stop. You're making it worse. Miss Marple's gaze shifted to Caroline, cold and piercing. Worse, Miss Barrington? Or simply clearer? You've played your own part in this, haven't you? Those letters Lavinia received, the ones dripping with threats and blackmail. Your handiwork, I presume? Caroline froze, her defiance crumbling. I don't know what you mean, she stammered, but her eyes betrayed her, darting to the door as if plotting an escape. Don't insult me, Miss Marple said, her tone icy. I found the drafts in your room, crumpled in the wastebasket, written in your florid script. You knew about Lavinia's past affair, didn't you? A man her family drove away, a death they covered up. You used it to extort her, demanding money to keep silent. But when she refused, you escalated, threatening her life if she married your brother. Caroline sank back into her chair, her face ashen. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered. I just wanted control. She had everything, beauty, wealth, and I had nothing. I thought if I scared her off, Arthur would be free. Free. Miss Marple's voice was a quiet lash. Free to inherit a legacy built on lies. You underestimated Lavinia, my dear. She didn't just run, she sought the truth. A private investigator, hired to dig into your family's past. And what she found drove her into hiding, not from fear of you, but from the horror of what you all concealed. The aunt chuckled softly, a sound that sent a chill through the room. Clever girl, she murmured, her eyes glinting with something dark and knowing. But you haven't seen the half of it, Miss Marple. Miss Marple turned to her, her expression unchanging. Then enlighten me, she said, her voice a calm challenge. What lies beneath this web of deceit? The aunt leaned forward, her floral dress rustling like dead leaves. You think Mary Ann was here for revenge, or some petty claim to inheritance? Oh no, she came for justice. She wasn't just Emma's daughter, she was my brother's child. The old Mr. Kingsley, Lavinia's father, sired her in secret, then cast Emma aside when she threatened to tell. He didn't just drive her away, he killed her, pushed her down those stairs himself, with my help to clean up the mess. The revelation struck like a lightning bolt, shattering the room's fragile silence. Mrs. Barrington gasped, clutching the mantel for support. Caroline's mouth fell open, her eyes wide with horror. Miss Marple, however, stood motionless, her face a mask of cold fascination. Your brother, she said, her voice steady. Lavinia's father. So Mary Ann was Lavinia's half-sister, a secret child erased from the family ledger. The aunt nodded, her smile twisting into something grotesque. Erased, yes, until she came back. She found me years ago, pieced it together from old letters I'd kept. She wanted the truth out, not money, not land, but the ruin of the Kingsley name. She planned to marry Arthur herself, posing as Lavinia, to infiltrate us and expose us. But she underestimated how far we'd go to keep our sins buried. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, her mind racing through the implications. So Mary Ann donned Lavinia's gown, not to claim a birthright, but to stage a masquerade that would destroy you all. And you, Mrs. Barrington, mistook her for Lavinia in the chaos of the wedding day. Mrs. Barrington's voice broke, a sob escaping her. I saw her in the garden, wearing that dress, laughing, mocking us. I thought Lavinia had betrayed us, allied with some scheme to ruin Arthur. I grabbed her, we fought. She clawed at me, tore my brooch. I didn't mean to kill her. I pushed her, and she fell into the well. I thought I'd saved us. Saved you. Miss Marple's tone was a quiet thunder. You murdered a woman who sought justice for a mother slaughtered by your husband's kin. And you, Caroline, fueled the fire with your greed, driving Lavinia to uncover a truth so vile it defies comprehension. Caroline buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. I didn't know about Marianne. I swear it. I just wanted Lavinia gone. The aunt laughed again, a sound like breaking glass. Gone? Oh, she's far from gone. She's out there, waiting, watching. She knows everything now, thanks to that investigator. And she'll see us burn for it. Miss Marple stepped back, her gaze sweeping the trio. Mrs. Barrington, broken and trembling. Caroline, a wreck of guilt and fear. And the aunt, reveling in the chaos she'd helped sow. A family built on murder, she said, her voice low and cutting. Emma's death wasn't an accident. It was an execution, ordered by a man who prized his name above his child's life. Marianne's murder wasn't a mistake. It was the echo of that sin, reverberating through the years. And Lavinia, caught in the middle, fled not just from your threats, but from the monstrous legacy she uncovered. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. But there's more, isn't there? She continued, her eyes locking onto the aunt. You've kept something back, something even darker. The aunt's smile widened, her eyes gleaming with malice. You're a sharp one, Miss Marple. Yes, there's more. The man Lavinia loved, the one her father removed, he wasn't just some suitor. He was Marianne's father, too. A stable hand, a nobody, seduced by Emma and then by Lavinia years later. Old Kingsley killed him to silence him and staged it as an illness. But before he died, he left a letter, hidden in this house, detailing everything. Marianne found it and used it to plan her revenge. And I kept it safe all these years, waiting for the right moment to watch it all collapse. Miss Marple's expression remained impassive, though her mind whirled with the grotesque truth. A double betrayal, she said. A man loved by mother and daughter, murdered by a patriarch to preserve a lie. And you, madam, preserved that lie, out of spite or twisted loyalty. Both, the aunt replied, her voice a hiss. I hated them all, my brother for his arrogance, Emma for her weakness, Lavinia for her innocence. I wanted them to suffer, but I wanted to choose the time. Marianne forced my hand. Miss Marple nodded, a single, precise movement. And now the time has come. Constable Barnes will hear of this, every sordid detail. The letter, I assume, is still here? The aunt's smile faltered. In the library, behind the portrait of old Kingsley. But you'll never is a word I rarely entertain. Miss Marple interrupted, her tone icy. She turned to the door, where Barnes waited, summoned by her earlier signal. Constable, search the library. Behind the patriarch's portrait, you'll find a letter that lays bare this family's rot. Barnes nodded, his face grim, and disappeared into the house. The room descended into chaos, Mrs. Barrington weeping, Caroline cursing under her breath, and the aunt laughing maniacally. Miss Marple stood apart, her calm unshaken, her eyes glinting with the cold satisfaction of truth revealed. The letter was found, yellowed, ink faded but legible, detailing a tale of seduction, betrayal, and murder. The stable hand, James Harrow, had loved Emma, fathered Marianne, and then years later fallen for Lavinia, unaware of their connection. Old Kingsley, enraged by the threat to his lineage, poisoned him, staging it as a fever, with the aunt as his silent accomplice. Marianne, discovering her dual heritage, sought to destroy the family that had erased her existence. Lavinia, learning the truth through her investigator, fled not just from danger, but from a heritage too horrific to bear. Days later, Lavinia returned, marrying Arthur in a quiet ceremony shadowed by grief. Miss Marple watched from the back pew, her face a mask of quiet reflection. The family's sins were exposed, Mrs. Barrington arrested, Caroline shamed, and the aunt confined to her memories. But the victory was hollow. The stable hand's blood stained them all, a legacy of evil no one had imagined. As the church bells tolled, Miss Marple walked away, her steps steady, her mind clear. Evil hides in the gentlest places, she murmured to herself, the wind carrying her words into the night. St. Mary Mead would heal, but its scars would whisper of a darkness deeper than anyone had dreamed. A darkness Miss Marple had faced without fear and conquered with truth. The Kingsley estate stood like a weary sentinel under the gray dawn of St. Mary Mead, its stone walls etched with the silent weight of years. The air was damp, heavy with the promise of rain, and the wind carried a faint moan through the skeletal branches of the garden's ancient oaks. Inside, the grand hall echoed with the ghosts of faded splendor, cracked plaster, tarnished silver, and portraits of stern ancestors staring down with hollow eyes. Miss Jane Marple entered this shadowed domain with the quiet certainty of a judge stepping into a courtroom, her gray coat a stark contrast to the gloom, her eyes sharp and unyielding as they swept over the gathered figures. Mrs. Barrington stood by the fireplace, her posture rigid, her face a mask of forced composure that cracked at the edges. Caroline, the groom's sister, perched on a velvet chair, her hands twisting a handkerchief into knots, her gaze flickering with unease. The elderly aunt lingered near the window, her floral dress a jarring note of color, her expression distant yet tinged with something unreadable, resignation, perhaps, or a flicker of grim satisfaction. The room pulsed with tension, a silent symphony of guilt and fear, and Miss Marple stood at its center, her presence a calm, unshakable force. She set her bag down with deliberate care, her movements slow and precise, her voice cutting through the stillness like a bell tolling in the fog. "Good morning," she said, her tone cool and measured, carrying no trace of the storm she was about to unleash. "I trust you've all had a restful night, though I imagine sleep comes poorly when a woman lies dead in your garden. Marian Fairbanks, I believe. An unexpected guest, wouldn't you say?" Mrs. Barrington's lips tightened, her voice a strained thread. "Miss Marple, this is hardly the time for your quaint little games. A tragedy has occurred, and we're all quite distraught." "Distraught, perhaps," Miss Marple replied, stepping closer, her eyes locking onto Mrs. Barrington's with quiet intensity. "But ignorant? I think not. Marianne's death was no accident. It was a calculated act, a desperate attempt to bury a secret this family has nurtured for far too long. Shall we begin to unearth it?" Caroline's head jerked up, her voice sharp with defiance. "This is ridiculous. She was a nobody, some maid's child. What could she possibly mean to us?" Miss Marple turned to her, her expression serene, yet edged with a faint, chilling resolve. "A nobody, Miss Barrington? Yet she was found in Lavinia's wedding gown, her body crumpled in your well. Curious, isn't it, how a nobody became the linchpin of this family's unraveling?" She paused, letting the words settle, then added, "I've spent the night piecing together the threads, and I assure you, they weave a tapestry far darker and far more human than you might wish to admit." The aunt's eyes glinted, her voice low and laced with a strange, mournful note. "You're a persistent one, Miss Marple. But be careful, some truths cut deeper than you know." "I've handled sharper blades than these," Miss Marple said, her tone unwavering. "And I've learned they often draw blood before they heal. Let's start with Marianne. Why she came, why she died, and what this family has hidden beneath its polished veneer." Miss Marple began her unraveling with the patience of a gardener tending a tangled vine, each question a gentle tug at the roots of deception. "Marian Fairbanks," she said, pacing slowly before the hearth, her voice steady and clear. "Daughter of Emma Fairbanks, a maid who served this house 20 years ago. Emma's death was ruled an accident, a fall down the cellar stairs, if memory serves. But the vicar recalls whispers of something more, a struggle, a cry cut short. Tell me, Mrs. Barrington, did you ever wonder what Emma knew that made her so inconvenient?" Mrs. Barrington's face paled, her hands clasping tighter. "That was decades ago," she said, her voice brittle. "A sad incident, nothing more. Why dredge it up now?" "Because the past is never truly gone," Miss Marple replied, her eyes glinting with quiet certainty. "It lingers, like a stain that won't wash out. Marian wasn't just Emma's daughter. She was a child of this house, born of a union so shameful you've all spent years erasing her existence. A child out of wedlock, hidden away to preserve a name that means nothing without its lies." The room gasped as one, the air thickening with shock. Mrs. Barrington staggered back, her hand flying to her throat. "That's preposterous," she cried. "You've no evidence, no evidence?" Miss Marple's voice was a quiet thunder, cutting through her protest. "The gardener found a locket near the well, a trinket engraved with the Kingsley crest, clutched in Marianne's hand. Her mother's, I suspect, passed down as a silent claim to her heritage. And then there's the gown, Lavinia's wedding dress, worn by Marianne as she fell. You thought she was Lavinia, didn't you? In your terror of scandal, you struck her down, believing you were silencing the bride who threatened your son's future. Mrs. Barrington's knees buckled, and she sank onto a chair, her face a mask of anguish. I didn't know, she whispered, her voice breaking. She was there, in the garden, wearing that dress. I thought Lavinia had turned against us, that she'd allied with someone to destroy us. I grabbed her. We fought, she tore at me. I pushed her, and she fell. I didn't mean to kill her. I thought I was protecting Arthur. Caroline leapt up, her voice a shrill edge of panic. Mother, stop. You're ruining everything. Miss Marple's gaze shifted to Caroline, her expression as cold and unyielding as Winterstone. Ruining? Miss Barrington? Or revealing? You've had your own hand in this, haven't you? Those letters Lavinia received, blackmail dripping with venom, threatening to expose her past. Your work, I presume. Caroline's defiance crumbled, her eyes wide with terror. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered, but her trembling hands betrayed her. Don't play the innocent, Miss Marple said, her tone sharp and unrelenting. I found the drafts in your desk, scribbled in your hand, demanding money to keep silent about Lavinia's lost love. You knew about her affair with that young man years ago, didn't you? A scandal her father buried, a death he masked as illness. You turned it into a weapon, but when she refused to pay, you pushed her toward the edge. Caroline sank back, tears streaming down her face. I didn't want her dead, she sobbed. I just wanted her gone, out of Arthur's life. She had everything, beauty, grace, and I had nothing. I thought if I scared her, she'd leave. I didn't know it would end like this. The aunt chuckled softly, a sound that shivered through the room like a cold wind. Oh, but it's not the end, my dear, she said, her eyes gleaming with a strange, sorrowful light. It's only the beginning. You've barely scratched the surface, Miss Marple. Miss Marple turned to her, her face serene yet alive with curiosity. Then let's dig deeper, she said, her voice a quiet invitation. What lies beneath this tragedy? The aunt leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried the weight of years. Marianne wasn't just a bastard child, she was Lavinia's sister. Half-sister, to be precise. Born to Emma and old Mr. Kingsley, Lavinia's father. He seduced Emma, promised her the world, then cast her out when she bore his child. And when she threatened to speak, he silenced her, pushed her down those stairs with my own eyes watching from the shadows. The revelation struck like a hammer, shattering the room's fragile calm. Mrs. Barrington's breath hitched, her hands trembling uncontrollably. Caroline's sobs turned to a choked gasp, her eyes wide with disbelief. Miss Marple, however, stood still, her face a mask of quiet awe, not at the horror, but at the intricate humanity of it all. Lavinia's sister, she murmured, her voice soft yet resonant. A child erased, a mother murdered, all to shield a man's pride. The aunt nodded, her smile twisting with bitter regret. Erased, yes, until Marianne returned. She found me years ago, pieced it together from whispers and old keepsakes. She didn't want money or land, she wanted truth. She planned to wear that gown, stand at the altar, and reveal it all, to tear down the Kingsley name from the inside. But she didn't count on our desperation. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, her mind weaving the threads into a clearer pattern. So Marianne posed as Lavinia, not for greed, but for justice. And you, Mrs. Barrington, mistook her for the bride in your blind panic. Mrs. Barrington's voice was a broken whisper. I saw her in the garden, laughing. I thought it was Lavinia mocking us. I couldn't let her destroy Arthur's future, not after all we'd sacrificed. I didn't know she was family. Family, Miss Marple echoed, her tone laced with a quiet sorrow. A word that means so little when it's built on blood and lies. And you, Caroline, drove Lavinia to uncover this truth. Your blackmail pushed her to hire that investigator to dig into a past she never knew held such pain. Caroline buried her face in her hands, her voice muffled. I didn't know about Marianne. I swear it. I just wanted her out of our lives. The aunt's laughter faded, replaced by a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of decades. And now she knows everything, she said. Lavinia's out there, carrying the scars of a family she never truly understood. She'll come back, but not for us. For herself. Miss Marple stepped back, her gaze sweeping the broken trio, Mrs. Barrington, shattered by her own hands, Caroline, undone by greed, and the aunt, a keeper of secrets too heavy to bear. A family built on murder, she said, her voice low and resonant. Emma's death was no accident. It was a sacrifice to a man's ego. Marianne's was no mistake. It was the echo of that crime, reverberating through time. And Lavinia, caught in the crossfire, fled not just from your threats, but from a legacy too cruel to claim. She paused, her eyes softening for the first time, a flicker of compassion breaking through her steel. "But there's more, isn't there?" she said, turning to the aunt. "A final thread, something that ties this all together." The aunt's gaze met hers, weary yet defiant. "You see too much, Miss Marple," she said. "Yes, there's more. The man Lavinia loved, the one her father killed, he was Marianne's father, too. James Harrow, a stable aunt. He loved Emma first, gave her Marianne, and then years later fell for Lavinia, never knowing the connection. Old Kingsley poisoned him, staging it as a fever, with me as his silent witness. Marianne found his last letter, hidden in this house, a confession of love and betrayal. She came to wield it like a torch to burn us all." Miss Marple's breath caught, not in shock, but in a quiet reverence for the tangled beauty of it all. "A love twice lost," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A man murdered for daring to bridge two worlds, a daughter avenging him, a sister fleeing him. And you, madam, kept that letter, not to heal, but to wound." The aunt's eyes glistened, a tear slipping free. "I wanted them to feel it," she said. "The pain I carried, watching my brother destroy lives, watching Emma die, watching Lavinia live in ignorance. I kept it to remind myself, until Marianne took it from me." Miss Marple nodded, her face softening further, though her resolve held firm. "Constable Barnes will find that letter," she said, her voice steady once more. "Behind the portrait of old Kingsley, I suspect. It will tell the tale you've all feared, a tale of love, murder, and a child cast aside." Barnes, summoned earlier, returned with the letter, yellowed, fragile, its words a raw cry from a man facing death. James Harrow's love for Emma and Lavinia bled through the ink, his fury at Kingsley's betrayal a final testament. The room dissolved into silence as Miss Marple read it aloud, her voice a quiet hymn to the lost. Days later, Lavinia returned. The church was hushed, its pews sparsely filled, the air thick with unspoken grief. She stood at the altar beside Arthur, her face pale but resolute, her eyes carrying a depth no one could fathom. Miss Marple watched from the back, her hands folded, her heart heavy with a strange, tender ache. The ceremony was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos that had preceded it, a union forged not in triumph, but in survival. As the bells tolled, Miss Marple stepped outside, the rain beginning to fall in soft, mournful drops. She looked back at the church, at Lavinia emerging with Arthur, her gaze distant yet alive with a fragile strength. "The truth always finds its way," she murmured, her voice carried by the wind. "Painful, yes, cruel, often, but it's the only path to something real." She walked away, her steps steady, her mind alight with the human cost of it all. Marianne's death had been a desperate cover for a bastard child, a secret that tore the family apart. Lavinia's return was no victory, it was a reckoning, a scarred soul reclaiming her life. The wounds would never fully heal, Miss Marple knew, not for Lavinia, not for the village that had cradled this darkness. But in their breaking, there was a glimmer of grace, a chance to live beyond the lies. The rain fell harder, washing the earth clean, and Miss Marple smiled faintly, a quiet tribute to the resilience she'd witnessed. Truth doesn't always mend, she thought, but it lets us breathe. And in St. Mary Mead, beneath the scars, breath was enough. As the storm raged on, she felt a sense of hope blossoming amid the chaos. Each drop seemed to carry away the weight of the past, leaving room for new beginnings in a village that had seen too much suffering.